Now, I want to move to the energy transfer and food chain length. Now, when we talk about the energy transfer and food chain length, in this case, we are looking at how the energy transfer from one trophic level affects the length of the food chain. Now, you will realize that a food chain will be short if there are few organisms, or alternatively there is less energy that is transferred from one trophic level to another, because there will be not enough energy to support higher trophic levels. Now, that's why I'm saying in the first statement here that the inefficient transfer of energy limits the number of trophic levels, meaning that not all the energy that is transferred from one trophic level to another. And because of that, the number of trophic levels is limited. Now, if you look at organisms which are in a higher trophic levels, they will tend to travel longer distances to look for mates, to look for food. And therefore, less of the energy is being used for growth and reproduction. Now, this is one of the key points you will get when answering some questions, whereby you will be able, you should be in a position to say, for example, the distance traveled by those animals in higher trophic levels to search for food and mates. Then there is less energy that is going to be used for growth and reproduction, and that one would reduce the chances of their survival. Meaning, if they travel long distances to look for food, to look for mates, and less energy is being used for growth and reproduction, it means that even the numbers of the organisms they produce will also be few, the offsprings. Their body sizes will also reduce, and this one will affect their chances of survival. Now, when you look at, for example, the number of lions that we have and the number of plants, you realize the number of lions they decrease, because you realize that you would have more gazelles than lions, more plants than gazelles. Now, this one is able to look at. We are looking at how the energy transfer can limit the number of organisms in a given trophic level, and at the same time limit the number of trophic levels. Now, there's what we refer as tropical regions. Tropical regions are the areas that contain actually that have large forests, enough plant materials, like we can talk of Amazon, we can talk of the tropical rainforest, for example, that are found in Central Africa and West Africa. Now, these regions they tend to have longer food chains, because you realize that because some of these are closer even to the even actually the light that falls on them. Let's look at, for example, the Earth as a globe. Light will fall on the center, but when you look at the other regions, you realize that they do not receive a lot of light energy. For example, the polar regions, the South Pole and the North Pole, and that's why those areas they have shorter food chains. But when you look at the tropical regions, they tend to have longer food chains because more light falls there, and they tend to have more complex food webs in those regions because there are so many food chains, and organisms have enough material. There is enough light energy. This light energy is converted to the primary productivity, that is stored actually as the material for these plants. Now, that is why we are saying that these tropical regions they tend to have more material, more primary production material, more material within the plants, more material for the next trophic levels, and therefore they tend to have complex food webs. Now, I want us to look at our next slide, whereby we are talking about the carbon cycle in nature. Now, the carbon cycle in nature, here we are looking at the actually when you were in O level, you talked about the nitrogen cycle, you talked about the carbon cycle, and at some point you have learned about the water cycle. Now, carbon is a very important thing in nature. The carbon that you are using today, it may be for John F. Kennedy. Okay, it might be even be any of the people who died before. That is the carbon that you are using today because it has been recycled. You may be using the carbon from a cat that died some months ago or some years ago. You may be using that of a snake that died some months ago or a given plant material. So all that you are made up of is the carbon that is being recycled from other organisms that have used it before and they are dead. They died and it has been recycled. That's why you can see we are saying that the chemical components of life are continually cycled, involving two phases. We have the abiotic phase and the biotic phase. The abiotic phase, it means that all the materials that are inorganic are incorporated into the tissues of living things, meaning it means that they are being converted to living things. But the abiotic phase is whereby the living things, they die, and that those materials, they are again returned to be part of the ecosystem. For example, when an animal dies, that is a biotic phase. When a plant leaves, or let's say you plant a seedling, it starts that is a seed, it starts forms a seedling and starts developing to a new plant. That is a biotic phase. But when we talk about a biotic phase, is when now the organism dies, for example, and then those materials, that's inorganic ions, are again now returned to the non-living part of the ecosystem, that is to the dead and decay matter. So we have the abiotic phase and the abiotic phase, living and non-living phases. Now we have the carbon cycle. You understand that carbon is very important. When we are looking in Unit 1 about the structure of proteins, the structure of carbohydrates and nucleic acids, you realize that they have carbon in their structure. And this one is very important. The carbon is very important in that in forming these carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids is very important in that it is able to maintain their structure and at the same time transfer the energy within their bonds from one organism to another. Now, let's look at the carbon sources. One, the carbon source, you can get it in the atmosphere, that is in the air in the atmosphere. You can get it dissolved in water, in the lakes, in the oceans and rivers. But the one in the atmosphere tends to be the most easily available to the plants. Now, you realize that much of the carbon dioxide is dissolved in oceans, lakes and rivers. But with time you will understand that these lakes and rivers, those lakes and oceans, they tend to carry a lot of carbon dioxide. And it's important that the water within these rivers and the lakes and the oceans keeps on mixing so that the carbon dioxide keeps on dissolving to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, this carbon dioxide that is in the lakes, the oceans, rivers, and even in the atmosphere, it is absorbed by, for example, the plants, and then it is incorporated into the products of photosynthesis. For example, when we talk of glucose, that glucose is the one that is converted to starch. And then when us as animals feed on those plants, we get that glucose, then we convert it to glycogen for storage. Now, that's why I'm saying in my fourth point on this slide that the carbon dioxide is absorbed and incorporated into complex compounds in plants during photosynthesis. It then passes in various organisms through food chains and returns to the atmosphere through respiration. Now, respiration is one of the ways that this carbon dioxide, this carbon let me talk of the carbon. This carbon is returned to the environment as carbon dioxide. As we have said from the top of this slide that it's a carbon cycle in nature, and the chemical components of this life are continually cycled, and that cyclic motion of this carbon is done by the animal, that the plants, in incorporating them into organic material during photosynthesis, like in this case glucose, and then it is passed to various animals through the food chains as glucose, let's say, or starch, and then it is returned to the environment during the process of respiration, where glucose is oxidized in the presence of oxygen to form CO2 and the water with the release of energy. That is now what we refer as the process of respiration and the release of carbon dioxide to the environment, which was incorporated as organic material in these plants. So I'd like to ask if you have any question up to that point. Any question? Hope you are not sleeping. Now I want to do the last part, which will take some few minutes, less than 5, on the carbon sinks. Now when we talk of the carbon sinks, a sink is a reservoir, it's a storage, it's like a store or a storage. Now when we talk about carbon sinks, it means we are looking at areas where this carbon is stored, either in form of carbon dioxide or in form of carbon. It can be stored, for example, in form of carbonates, hydrogen carbonates, or carbon dioxide somewhere. Now, when that carbon dioxide, for example, has been removed from the atmosphere, it is usually stored in what we refer as organic or inorganic compounds. For example, it can be stored as carbon dioxide somewhere, or it can be stored as calcium carbonate, or as carbonates, let's say, or it can be stored in form of glucose, in form of starch or glycogen, or other organic compounds like nucleic acids, like proteins, like fats. So once it has been removed from the atmosphere, it is stored in the bodies of animals and plants, and it can also be stored in humus. This is dead decaying matter. It can be stored in form of limestone. Limestone is calcium carbonate. It can be stored in form of chalk, or it can be stored in form of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is like when you talk about the crude oil, the petroleum, which contains other components, other fractions, like you did the separation of various fractions in the petroleum in your O level, whereby you get things like alkanes, that is, for example, ethane, methane, like that, butane, propane, all those are fossil fuels, kerosene, petroleum, diesel, so it can be stored there. Now it can also be stored in form of carbon dioxide in the oceans, where it dissolves in form of carbon dioxide. Then the phytoplanktons, which we said they are ocean plants, they absorb that carbon dioxide and then use it for photosynthesis, so that the zooplanktons can feed on those phytoplanktons. So the carbon can be stored in animal and plant bodies. It can be stored in humus. It can be stored in limestone or chalk or fossil fuels. I've given examples of those fossil fuels. It can be stored as dissolved carbon dioxide in oceans, rivers, or lakes. Then it can now be converted by those phytoplanktons into glucose or other material in the process of photosynthesis, and that it can then the phytoplanktons can be fed on by the zooplanktons. Phytoplanktons are plants in water, The zooplanktons are those animals that are found, the small animals that are found in water. And that brings me to the end of this session.